In one word, this case is unfocused. It has a few problems. It's got a mess of solutions, and one of them is that it seems like the drive cage was designed in isolation from the back connect motherboard compatibility. So for example, because this case is trying to support those boards that have cables going into the back, they've carved out this pass-through hole in the back wall of the motherboard tray that then has to pass through the drive cage, which then passes through the drive cage sled, if you want to keep it in there, and eliminates a drive cage mount. So it's like the two were designed in isolation of each other, but that's not the only shortcoming here. Additionally, Corsair's filters on the case are large and loose fitting without sufficient integrated support, as you can see here, and they've got this huge piece of aftermarket plastic structure that we've branded Corsair's oh shit moment of product design, where they already got through and designed everything else and needed a solution to stop the fans from sucking this large loose filter into the fans. God damn it. Corsair also used heavy steel on the top with this thick structure to create this exaggerated valley effect down the center, but went really cheap with the mesh panels, like that nice bending effect. But that's because they've reinforced all of the mesh panels with, instead of steel and metal, like they have ample amounts of up here, plastic. And the end result is that every mesh panel on this case sags. This is as charitable as possible because I'm not gonna hold it up. This is the normal orientation, and it's got quite a radius on it. Bending like a banana, as Kingpin would say. In fact, even the top panel does this, where if we hold this one, you can see the sag right in the middle there. It's like Corsair saw what they were doing with video cards and thought they'd jump in, except there's not like 4 pounds of heatsink attached to this. Corsair has some nice touches on this case, like the yellow accent on the USB ports and on the washer for some of the screws, but they didn't follow this through like they've done in years past. So typically, they've also done a yellowing on the pull tab or in some other small areas of the case that show an intentional attention to detail. And by, on the front side of the case, really only showing it in those USB ports has the opposite effect, where they make it look like a mistake, like it's some leftover port from the 90s. There's also a documentation problem with the case where, one, it's not consistent between its materials. Two, they're kind of scattered, but it's a good idea, it just wasn't executed well. And then three, open loop hardware is technically supported, it's just not documented very well. So these are the Corsair 6500 cases. One's the 6500X with the glass, one is the 6500D Airflow with the mesh front panel. Today we're reviewing them. These are $200 each, no fans included in either one of these. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly's Aeronaut and Hydronaut thermal pastes. Aeronaut is Thermal Grizzly's entry-level thermal solution, marketed as resistant to curing and for long-term endurance. Hydronaut is Thermal Grizzly's next step up, targeted for overclocking and higher performance applications. We've used Hydronaut on a lot of our systems internally over the years. You can learn more at the link in the description below. The styling of these dual chamber cases feels familiar to the O11 family. Another O11D, a Montech King 95, the GameMax Hype, another O11, the Antec C8, ARGB edition. But despite fitting in with this trend, Corsair isn't actually a follower here. It actually came before all of these, and it was with the Carbide Air 540, and they had others that were dual chamber as well. I wrote about the Air 540 in 2013, and it's been a few years. But about 10 to 12 years ago, Corsair was fighting fiercely in the case market. The Corsair C70 and its edgy military theming had some highlights, like a flip-up button cover and heavy-duty panel latches. Corsair had the bulbous 600T and the popular 780T. Lately, they've moved away from styling and feature development in the case industry, and these days, Corsair's strategy seems to be to make safe styles that follow or fit in with trends in the industry. The Corsair 4000D gets huge credit, though, for keeping the more affordable case market alive, and the 5000D remains available and was Corsair's last mid-range case, launched in 2021. It seems like Corsair's strategy with the 4000, 5000D, 7000D, and with these is to build and design a case that is relatively timeless for an era, something that's safe, something they can launch to the market, and in 3 years, they can still sell it for roughly the same price. That allows them to spread the R&D and tooling cost over more years, and it's a big company move. Corsair's a big company now. It's somewhere around 3 times the size it was, minimally, for employee count compared to when the Air 540 came out. It's different now. But big company moves, despite being sometimes characterless, can have their advantages as well. So the 6500 series, it feels like a spiritual successor in some ways to the Corsair 680, but improved. Before we get into more detail on it, we need some alternatives. Alternatives to this case include the Lian Li O11D Dynamic Evo series, the Hyte Y60 and Y70 Non-Touch that we just reviewed on the channel if you want to check it out, the King 95 Pro from Montech, the Antec C8 ARGB, and that's just some of the recent dual chamber cases, all in the same general form factor and price category. And we've got fresh data for each of those from our recent Hyte Y70 review to compare that we'll look at today in our new ATX case testing methodology. And looking big picture first, this case is pretty heavy for a case.
Everything I'm showing today are very heavy.
And a lot of that weight comes from these swappable panels. So the front and the top here can be exchanged. They've got a couple variants. One of them is aluminum. This, just by default, is steel. And swapping this, if you look at how thick that steel is, swapping that for an aluminum panel actually has a meaningful weight reduction. If you needed an example of why companies will often go to aluminum for weight, this is the perfect one. The 6500 though, it's interesting because it feels like this combination of sturdy and relatively quality feeling materials and assembly with really cheap and really bad materials and assembly. Let's start with some of the small, weirder oversights. The first weird one is compatibility with back connect motherboards. Corsair's trying to satisfy this demand, but the whole thing feels like an afterthought that started partway through design, maybe for corporate political capital to please their partners in the ecosystem. Corsair included a full set of cutouts for normal ATX boards and back connect mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX motherboards from both Asus and MSI. Corsair is pretty confident in its abilities in this regard.
Re-engineering such a crucial part of case design for entirely new standards without compromising something else obviously isn't easy, but at the same time, we are Corsair, so it was absolutely fine.
So the problem with all this unfolds here. There's an awkward gap underneath where the power supply mounts. It mounts here. It doesn't make much sense. Feels like just kind of a byproduct of something they were trying to do rather than intentional. The hard drive cage gets in the way. So you've got this cutout through the hard drive cage for the EPS 12-volt cables and back connect boards. But if we bring the camera down a little bit, you'll see the normal cutout for the normal EPS 12-volt that doesn't get in the way. This is why Corsair punched what seems like an otherwise completely random hole through the hard drive cage, which isn't discussed in the manual at all. They have two 2.5 or 3.5 inch sleds on the drive cage and two 2.5 inch mounts on the side, which Corsair calls, quote, expansive storage options. But if you use one of Corsair's rotated shift power supplies, which has been specifically shown with the 6500 series, the hard drive cage must be removed completely, eliminating all official drive support from the case. All of it. No drives except NVMe or whatever you lay on the floor of the case. If you just route CPU power cables through the cage but without a shift power supply, one of the sleds is unusable. There's another spot in the bottom of the case where you could force one of the 2.5 inch mounts with some bending, but it's not officially supported. We recommend using the sleds inside the drive cage first, since cabling for the mounts on the side can press against the side panel, and you've already seen how flimsy that is. The 3.5 inch mounting is toolless, but it lacks vibration damping, so another place for improvement. So they designed for drives, and they designed for back connect motherboards, but they didn't design for both of them. At least not properly, not in a way that seems like it was all intentional. They were made in isolation of each other, where one causes compromises with the other, and yet there's all this extra space in the backside that seems like it just could have been used more thoughtfully. For open loops, there appear to be pump or reservoir mounting holes next to the expansion slots and a drain hole at the bottom of the case. We say appear to be because Corsair doesn't mention these features in the online manual. There's no physical manual, at least not with ours, or the reviewer guide, or the jumble of tagged posts on their website that tries to be an extra manual or something. This is a premium case with showcase glass panels, as they say, made by a company that has its own line of open loop hardware. But Corsair's only acknowledgement of open loop hardware in a 6500 is in this video and the article that accompanies it. Corsair needs to organize its materials. There are genuinely helpful blog posts for this case, but finding specific information is a chore. Let's bring it back to the filters. So the 6500 series, it's got filters in a couple places. For the mesh, there's one in the mesh front panel with the mesh itself. So there's that metal layer, then this really fine, almost kind of invisible nylon style filter, except it's not invisible because you can see that it is bulbous. It's like the precursor to Bulbasaur or something. There's another filter over here on this side. There's one on the top. There's a pull-out filter in the bottom, which is a little more standard. These panels are already all kind of bowed. I mean, you can see this one pretty clearly as we talked about earlier. But you've got the extra problem of such a large piece of mesh with no reinforcement whatsoever. And then, as we said earlier, this piece is designed to move around, which is interesting. Maybe for the power supply over here or something. But in either case, this is clearly to stop that filter from just getting sucked into the side-mounted fans and causing new problems. So all of these seem like they are going to sag with time. And we like airflow, and we like Corsair's triangular vent hole motif, but the mesh panels are unpleasantly fragile. It's a strange contrast with the complete overkill armor plating in other areas where you've got steel that seems like it could stop a bullet. Since all of the panels snap into place, removing them requires prying them up on one side, which unavoidably curls them. Interestingly, Corsair also has quite a few add-ons available for the 6500, and we actually don't hate all of them. There's some interesting ideas here. There's a rapid route kit of cable channels and Velcro ties that cost $15. There's a glass kit to convert the 6500D airflow to a 6500X. That's $35. A vertical GPU mount kit's available with a riser cable for $75. There's a wooden Elite panel kit, and then the black or silver aluminum Elite panel kits, which are $100, the wood one at $75. We'd like to see the rapid route kit included with the case. We noticed that some of the included twist ties are the type that disintegrate like you get on a bag of bread. The Elite panel kits replace 4 plates on the 6500D airflow, 3 on the 6500X. The stock plates are extremely heavy. They're 3.2 millimeter thick steel. The single plate that the I/O attaches to weighs 1.3 kilograms on its own, while its aluminum equivalent weighs 0.4 kilograms. Fresh out of the box, the 6500X weighs 14.5 kilograms, and the 6500D airflow weighs 14.8 kilograms, with the non-structural plates making up a large share of those numbers. The case is pretty heavy. Now, if you're watching this and you're like, that's a lot of kilograms, I don't know what those are, you can do like one of our commenters did previously and unironically say, why do you hate freedom? Use inches. And to that, I would say we have a full blog post that will give you the measurements in cubits, furlongs, reams, and quires. Hopefully one of those is useful to you. I didn't write a blog post. You can just go to Google and convert it. But those are all real measurements. Installing an Elite panel kit isn't complicated, although it's hard to access the screws on the front plate. It is pretty straightforward though. The tolerances on our sample were tight, with minimal gaps between the plates and around the I/O ports. This is great and one of the better places of attention to detail from Corsair, despite the shortcomings. The side fan and the radiator mount is held in with a single screw, and the tray can be screwed down without being hooked into place properly, which stood out to us as one example where Corsair's manufacturing, rather than its design, let us down on the case. This mount is 120 millimeters only, but there would have been space to fit a 140 millimeter mount without expanding the case. On to the less negative features of the case. So the side and bottom mounts for radiators can both support 360 millimeter radiators without being in conflict with each other, which is great. Installing fans and a radiator in the bottom mount will reduce access to the bottom of ATX motherboards, but Corsair has oriented the cable cutouts in this location so that they can't be blocked. That's also excellent. The front mount in the 6500D airflow does have some overlap with the bottom mount, so we recommend focusing on the bottom and the side for liquid cooling. Some positives with the right side panel as well for both of these. First of all, the gap between the front and the side glass here, these two pieces, is really well done. The tolerances are super tight, they fit together really flushly, that's good. Also, on the back over here, there is a screw to hold things in place. So we like seeing that. It is lacking a way to fully secure the panel, so it can still swing open, but at least they've got something basic in there. Now, there are some downsides to the side panel. So as a quick aside, point out the, I don't even know, just look at it, I guess. I don't need to say anything. This is when it's not socketed, clearly. And it's lacking some of that structure, that rigidity to help bring it up to stay level. And it actually looks like as pointed out by Vitaly behind the camera, this is something that Corsair became aware of during the design process because they strapped this piece of chamfered metal to the bottom so that when it starts to approach, it will collide with that bottom lip and then guide it up and in case the user is just pushing without much thought. So as you can see, it eventually gets it there. Definitely just a weird place to have a cheaper feeling. So while it's a positive that they have a guide if it gets misaligned, it's a negative that they need one, and as it sags more and more, it could just scratch the paint anyway. There are no fans included with the two less expensive 6500 SKUs that we're covering here, but even so, Corsair has included fan screws, and they're trademarked. They're trademarked screws. Allow me to introduce the new One Twist Quick Turn registered TM, where quick is spelled wrong. It's a screw, just to be clear. It's trademarked, has a name. We're mentioning them though because Corsair went through the trouble of painting the screw heads, which is actually nice. If they spent that level of attention on other places, it would be a much better case. The positive is that these are much faster to use, and again, they include them anyway. The accessory kit also includes a color-matched splitter for the front panel connections in case your motherboard doesn't have the usual layout. The I/O cables are all color-matched as well with our white case, which is another touch that we liked. And the rubber grommets are double shot molded with the inner portion made from a more flexible material, while the outer ring is rigid enough to keep the grommet from popping out. This works, and it's excellent attention to detail, but it also means that the white grommets are slightly different for shade around the edges. We overall like this element of detail though. Finally, the bar between the power supply chamber and the side fan mount is extremely easy to remove, and it's well designed. The entire front panel comes off without much effort, although that's another thing you'll need to dig through the Corsair blogs for. Now for thermal testing. This is with all of our new methodology, which we've been really excited about, so we showed the most recent version of it in our Hyte Y70 Non-Touch review. It's on the channel, you should check it out. Lay some of the groundwork. We made some changes from the Fractal North XL methodology. Basically, the changes were we wanted to increase the heat load, make it a little more challenging for the cases, and so we've done that. For this, so since it doesn't come with any fans, we've used our standardized set of fans. This is the solution we've chosen when a case is fanless. We use the same ones for all of them, and for all of the fanless cases, that is. And then we do have a chart that uses only standardized fans, none of the included ones. That's all explained as we walk through the thermals. This case is a little different though. The exception is that the side mount only fits 120mm fans, so for side intake tests, we changed out the usual 2 Noctua 140 fans for 2 Arctic P12 Max fans. We'll start with noise-normalized thermal results, which are gathered by lowering the case fan speeds for the included fans until the total noise level hits 27 dBA, measured in our hemi-anechoic chamber from 1 meter directly in front of the case. We leave the CPU and the GPU fan speeds undisturbed for all cases. Now we noise-normalize configurations separately, but there was only a tiny difference in noise levels between the 6500X with side intake and the 6500D airflow with side intake, so those two configurations used the same fan speed. For CPU thermals amongst the Corsair cases and using the standardized fans since these don't include any, the straightforward front intake configuration for the 6500D airflow came out on top at 48 degrees Celsius above ambient for the average all-core CPU temperature and 52 degrees for the P-cores alone. The two cases were warmer with side intake, with both averaging about 49 degrees all-core and 53 for the P-cores. Bottom intake in the 6500X was the worst among them, since incoming air was blocked by the GPU. In total, though, the bottom to top range between all the Corsair configurations for all-core CPU average was less than 3 degrees within the 6500 series. The bottom intake configuration directed less noise towards our microphone for testing, which meant the fan speeds didn't need to be reduced as much to hit the noise-normalized threshold. This is actually awesome because this is a huge advantage of the change we made with the noise chamber. We wouldn't have been able to identify these types of really minor differences before, and now we can. And so we get to see a different picture of things, which is that because the bottom intake configuration now is measurable as not directing as much noise towards the mic, we're able to see that it helped out the performance here to have that slightly higher RPM but still hit noise normalized. Both of these 6500 SKUs are $200, which puts them close to the $220 Hyte Y70. For CPU thermals, the 6500X with bottom intake tied the Y70 with bottom intake, and both 6500s with side intake nearly tied the Y70 with side intake. The Y70 isn't capable of front intake, so the 6500D airflow has an advantage in being able to more directly target the cooler, with this specific test bench. It's going to change a little bit, so if you have like a massive AIO, a different scenario. Among our dual chamber case results, the Lian Li O11D Evo XL did best at 43 degrees all-core and 47 P-core, and both it and the Montech King 95 Pro beat all of the 6500 series results. The Antec C8 ARGB with its stock bottom intake configuration performed nearly the same as the Y70 and the 6500X with bottom intake. Ignoring dual chambers, the Fractal Torrent remains the GOAT here. This chart is for GPU load thermals with the stock case fans, or those we've added to empty cases at full speed. The 6500X averaged 45 degrees Celsius above ambient on the GPU with bottom intake, while the 6500D airflow with front intake averaged 49 degrees. Both of these results were gathered with the standard Noctua fans. There aren't any P12 Max results on this chart. The bottom intake configuration benefits GPU thermals as well as noise levels from the front, with the 6500X running both cooler and quieter at 35.6 dBA versus the 6500D airflow at 40.8. Remember the last chart though, CPU cooling was better with front intake. Front intake with the 6500D airflow made it louder than the rest of the dual chamber cases on the chart, all of which were tested with side or bottom intake, but didn't put it up at the same level of GPU performance as the similarly loud 42.3 dBA Torrent. The Torrent remains unbelievably good here, keeping in mind that this is with included fans, and it has an advantage there, but even from a noise efficiency standpoint, it's doing well. From the perspective of GPU thermals, the 6500D was both hot and loud during this test. The O11D Evo XL was about 1 dBA quieter and 1 degree cooler, while the C8 ARGB and the Y70 with side intake were both at least 1 dB louder and at least 4 degrees cooler. This chart covers our standardized fan test, where all cases use the same set of Noctua fans at full speed. These are not noise normalized, but they do use the same fan speeds throughout the case. Bottom intake in the 6500X was still worse for CPU thermals than front intake in the 6500D at 47 degrees all core versus 41. It's a big difference, it makes sense, but it is a large difference. Removing the front panel from the 6500D showed what a difference an unobstructed airflow path can make, with an all-core average of 37 degrees and P-core average of 41. That's cooler than any other logged results for both metrics. This is noteworthy because we've removed all of that double filtering, so an improvement of, say, 4 degrees is relatively large from the impedance of those filters and the mesh double stacked. Sorted by CPU thermals, the best results for Corsair are with front intake, then side intake, then bottom intake, and then there's almost no deviation from that order. Competing cases without removing panels would have been the Lian Li O11D Evo as advantaged as with the Evo XL, and the Torrent also advantaged even without its huge 180mm fans. Back to the original noise-normalized results, but focusing on GPU thermals rather than CPU, the bottom intake configuration for the 6500X was the clear winner at 44 degrees above ambient on average, with the two side intake results again within variance of each other around 45 degrees, and front intake in last place at 47. The C8 ARGB was the clear winner among dual chamber cases at 42 degrees average, an impressive result, and attributable to Antec's decisions on its fan placement and type. The bottom intake Y70 configuration came close to the 6500X at 45 degrees. Back to the standardized fan chart, the 6500 series' GPU thermals didn't compare as well as all the fans matched and running at full speed. The 6500X bottom intake result at 45 degrees above ambient was the best among the 6500 series, which is beaten by the O11D Evo XL and the Y70 bottom intake at 44 degrees, and the King 95 Pro and Antec C8 at 43 degrees. The Y70 with side intake also did unusually well here at 41 degrees average. VRM thermals for the 6500X fell within a tight 33 to 35 degree range above ambient for the most part, with the bottom intake 6500X on the cool end and the two side intake results tied at the high end. The SPD hub thermals from memory were also tied with the two side intake configurations, and front and bottom intake results were within variance of each other. The Antec C8 remains a strong competitor here with its default configuration when noise normalized, and it does well for both RAM and VRM thermals. Ahead of that, Montech's King 95 Pro benefits from a fan count blanketing the board with air, despite that not working as well in general for CPU and GPU thermals when noise normalized, but still fine. Overall, starting with the comparison just between these two cases, so the 6500D and the 6500X don't have a ton of differences between them thermally in our testing, especially when noise normalizing. And that's for some pretty obvious reasons, which is that it's not like the old days where it was only a solid or an airflow front panel and no other options for intake. Now there's side, bottom options, everything else. So they're pretty similar. The key differences are the mesh variant does have an extra spot, of course, to mount fans, and that's because it's got a mesh front. So that gives some more 140 millimeter fan mounting options. That kind of changes things. It comes down to basically personal preference. Do you value the glass panel versus the 140 mil mounting locations additionally on top of what's already in there on the side? Now, if you need an ATX BTF or a Project Zero or a MGRC, had to check the naming for that one again, compatible case, then the list is extremely short. And it really feels like Corsair should have focused. We come back to that first word that we attributed to these two cases, which is unfocused. If Corsair had focused a little more and made it either just a, this is going to be our back compatible cabling, whatever they call it, case, then that would have resolved some of the shortcomings, or at least if they had started the design with that plan. But they didn't do that, because then they would sell 3 cases. So the other option would be to design ground up, something that can support the normal motherboards and the back connect motherboards, but not try to, I mean, it seems like they retrofitted this mid-design. And if they didn't, and people from Corsair are watching, they're like, no, that's wrong. We started with this plan, then that's even worse. That's like actually embarrassing, because there's a lot of wasted space where it doesn't make sense the way it was designed. Anyway, there's not a lot of options for back connect, so this is maybe one of them for you. The Corsair 6500 series is joined by the Jonesbo TK3, the Inwin F5 as maybe the most visible options made by third parties, not by Asus or MSI. But if you don't need compatibility with the back connect motherboards, there are cheaper dual chamber cases. The Montech King 95 costs as little as $90 without fans. We've seen discounts even lower. And it includes an optional mesh front panel, and the Antec C8 ARGB should be available soon for less than $200, including those fans for the ARGB variant. For that matter, all of the other dual chamber cases that we've tested recently are close to falling within the $200 budget, even the Lian Li O11D Evo XL and the Hyte Y70 Non-Touch. There are things we want to like about this case. For me personally, this case, different aspects of it, feel like designed by committee. Big company things. Let's have multiple meetings and talk about design and try to accommodate every possible thing that might generate one sale and squeeze it all into a box and call that a product. And maybe I'm ascribing that to Corsair just because they're a big company, so I'm assuming they behave that way. But at the end of the day, that's how it feels when it comes out of the box, and it's sort of inarguable. You look at it, they try to accommodate everything. They don't do a particularly good job at any big picture stuff, even though there's a lot of like really small, interesting details, like this Velcro strap at the back of the case I've been looking at, some of the yellow washers on the screws on the back, stuff like that, where it's just like, apply that everywhere. Apply that to the big picture stuff. Or a side panel where it doesn't look like it's something you would find growing on a banana tree. Because that's the curvature we've got of that bend. It's a hell of a bend. I mean, this is like Intel CPU IHS under clamping levels of bend. That's impressive. It normally takes a $20 billion fab to do that kind of curvature, and Corsair threw it onto a mesh panel. So again, there's things that are really interesting about this. The swapping the panels is a nice gimmick. A gimmick here not used in a denigrating way, but in a genuine, this is a marketing tool to generate sales and say, here's a different way you can present the case. It's a nice way to try and do that and accommodate some different styles. It's not enough. It's not enough to save the case. It's one of those where I don't hate the whole case. I just really hate specific parts of it. And that's enough for, if I'm buying a case right now, there's too many good options in the same price category where I'm probably not considering this one. I think Patrick feels largely the same way with things like the C8, the O11 series, the Y series from Hyte, the Montech King 95 being cheaper, lower quality materials in some areas, but simultaneously better put together in a lot of ways. So Corsair has somewhat lost its way over the years with case design, and they're trying to design things for longevity, and they need to focus on just making things that are good now, like in the immediate future. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching as always. Subscribe for more. We have a ton of case reviews coming up because we're getting back into the swing of things. We've got the Fractal North XL. That was with a revisional step of our new methodology, and then we fully deployed it with the Y70 Non-Touch. So go check those out, and we'll see you all next time.